The Admiral was supposed to walk straight past me. Instead, he stopped 3 feet away and stared at my hand like he'd forgotten where he was. His handshake lasted maybe 2 seconds, but I noticed the tattoo before he let go. It was an old compass on the inside of his wrist, faded around the edges with one strange detail: the needle pointed toward the Big Dipper. I had seen that tattoo before. Not on a sailor. Not on a soldier. On my mother. I was there because my commander had sent me to pick up the Admiral from the train station and drive him to the base. I had expected a quick introduction, maybe a polite conversation during the 40-minute drive. Then I saw his wrist. I asked, "Sir, where did you get that?" His expression changed so slightly I almost missed it. "Why?" "My mother had one just like it." He stopped breathing for a moment. I gave him her name. That was when the Admiral's face lost all its color. His eyes dropped to the floor. His lips parted, but nothing came out. I'd never seen a decorated officer look frightened before. Then he looked at me again, and there was something in his eyes that made my stomach tighten. He knew my mother. And judging by his reaction, he knew something about her that she'd never told me. The Admiral didn't answer me. He picked up his bag and started walking toward the parking lot. I followed without saying anything. The station was crowded, but he moved like he couldn't hear any of it. People passed us carrying coffee and luggage. A train announcement echoed overhead. I noticed he kept rubbing the tattoo with his thumb. That bothered me more than his silence. When we reached my truck, he stopped beside the passenger door. "Your mother?" he said quietly. "What was her full name?" I told him. He looked away. "Where is she now?" "She passed away 11 years ago." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry." The way he said it didn't sound polite. It sounded personal. I opened the door for him. During the drive he barely spoke. He asked where I was stationed, how long I'd served, and whether I had any brothers or sisters. Nothing about my mother. I answered his questions, then watched the road. About 20 minutes in, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and immediately declined the call. A minute later, it rang again. This time he turned the phone face down. I didn't ask who it was. When we reached the base, he finally said something that stayed with me. "Your mother never told you about the summer of 1987? I shook my head. He stared through the windshield. "No. I suppose she wouldn't have." Then he opened the door, stepped out, and walked inside without explaining what happened that summer. I sat there for another minute. My mother had never mentioned 1987. But the Admiral had. I thought about 1987 all night. Not because the year meant anything to me. Because my mother had always been careful about certain parts of her life. She kept old photographs in a metal box beneath her bed. I had seen it plenty of times growing up, but she never let me look through it. After she died, I found the box in my closet. I hadn't opened it since. The next morning, I was halfway through coffee when I remembered something. There had been a photograph from 1987. 2 people standing beside a boat. My mother was younger, smiling in a way I rarely remembered seeing. The man beside her had his back turned. I couldn't see his face. I drove to my apartment after duty and pulled the box from the closet. Inside were photographs, postcards, and an old brass compass. I recognized it immediately. The compass had the same tiny star pattern engraved around the edge that appeared in the Admiral's tattoo. I turned it over. There were initials scratched into the metal. AR. I sat on the floor for a long time staring at them. My mother's initials weren't AR. Neither were mine. Then I found an envelope underneath the photographs. There was no stamp. No address. Only one sentence written across the front in my mother's handwriting. "If he ever finds you, don't trust what he tells you first." I read it twice. Then I heard my phone ringing from the kitchen. The Admiral was calling. And somehow I already knew he wasn't calling to explain the tattoo. I answered on the 3rd ring. The Admiral didn't say hello. "Where did you find that envelope?" I looked at the box on the floor. "How do you know about it?" There was a long silence. Then he said, "Because I put it there." I didn't speak. He continued before I could ask anything. "Your mother and I served together in 1987. We weren't supposed to be in the same place. That part of the story was classified for years." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "What happened?" "She saved my life." His voice cracked slightly. Then he told me the part nobody had ever told me. My mother wasn't simply someone he'd known. She had been the person who carried him out after an operation went wrong. He'd been badly injured, and she stayed behind when everyone else had been ordered to leave. But there was more. Before they separated, he gave her the compass. He said it was a promise that he'd find her again. He never did. My mother came home, married my father, and never mentioned him. I asked why she'd kept the compass. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said, Because she was protecting you. That sentence made me sit down. Protecting me from what? His breathing changed. Your father wasn't your biological father. I stared at the wall. The Admiral continued quietly. Your mother never told me you were born. I found out only 3 months ago. I couldn't speak. Then he said the one thing that explained why his hands had been shaking at the station. I'm not here because of your assignment. He paused. I'm here because I'm your father. I didn't respond for several seconds. There are some sentences your mind refuses to accept on the first hearing. I asked him to meet me somewhere private. We sat in a small conference room at the base. No officers. No staff. Just the two of us and a pot of coffee neither of us touched. He brought a folder. Inside were copies of letters, old service records, and photographs from 1987. He didn't push them toward me. He just said, your mother asked me not to look for you. Why? She was afraid you'd become a target. That answer didn't make sense. He opened one of the letters. My mother's handwriting filled the page. She had written that she wanted me to grow up believing my father was the man who raised me. She wasn't trying to erase the Admiral. She was trying to keep me away from the people connected to what had happened overseas. Then I saw a name repeated several times. A retired contractor. The Admiral said the man had been involved in the operation where he was injured. What does he have to do with me? The Admiral looked directly at me. Your mother believed he was still watching her. I felt my shoulders tighten. Did he know about me? We don't know. That was the first answer he gave me that sounded honest. Before I left, he handed me one final photograph. It showed my mother standing beside the Admiral. She was holding the same compass I'd found in the box. On the back she'd written a date. And underneath it were 4 words that made everything feel much bigger than a family secret. He knows about our son. I took the photograph home and didn't tell anyone what I'd learned. Not my friends. Not my commander. Nobody. The Admiral agreed that was safer until we understood who had been watching my mother. I started with records. Nothing dramatic. Just names, dates, addresses, and old reports. The contractor's name appeared in several documents connected to the 1987 operation. He had retired years ago, but his company still existed under a different name. Then I found something strange. Someone had accessed my mother's old personnel file 6 months after her death. The access wasn't anonymous. It came from a government account. I called the Admiral. He was silent for several seconds. Send me the record. I did. He called back 10 minutes later. That account shouldn't exist anymore. I asked what that meant. It means someone has been using an identity that was supposed to be inactive. That night, I checked the mailbox before going inside. There was a plain envelope waiting for me. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of the same photograph I'd been given. Except this copy had one detail circled in red. The compass. Underneath it, someone had written, your mother should have destroyed this. I stood beside my front door reading it twice. Then my phone buzzed. A message from the Admiral appeared. Don't go home tonight. I looked back at my apartment. The hallway was empty. But my door was slightly open. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I didn't touch the door. I called the Admiral from the parking lot and waited in my truck until 2 security officers arrived. They cleared the apartment. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing looked disturbed. That was almost worse. Then one officer found the camera I'd never noticed above the hallway light. It wasn't mine. The Admiral had expected something like this. Within hours, federal investigators were involved. They traced the device to a contractor who had been working under a false identity. His name matched the man from my mother's letters. He wasn't after money. He wanted the compass. The old brass compass had contained a tiny coded marking that connected several people to the 1987 operation. My mother had kept it because she believed exposing the truth would put me in danger. The Admiral had spent months quietly reopening the case. The evidence was finally enough. The contractor was arrested before he could leave the country. I never saw him. I didn't need to. A week later, the Admiral asked me to meet him at the same train station where we'd first spoken. He looked older than he had that morning. He held out his wrist. The compass tattoo was still there. I should have found you sooner, he said. I looked at the faded ink. For years, I thought my mother had kept secrets because she didn't trust me. I finally understood the truth. Sometimes people hide the truth because they love you enough to carry its weight themselves. I looked at the Admiral. And for the first time I called him Dad. He didn't correct me. He just looked down for a moment and nodded. We stood there while trains came and went behind us. Neither of us knew what to say next. There wasn't going to be some perfect conversation that fixed 30 years. I understood that. My mother was still gone. My father was still a stranger. And there were things about 1987 I would probably never know. But I had stopped feeling like I'd been cheated out of something. I had been given the truth. A few weeks later, the investigation officially closed. The people connected to the old operation were questioned, records were released, and the contractor faced charges for what he'd done. The Admiral never tried to buy his way into my life. He didn't send expensive gifts. He didn't ask me to call him every day. Instead, he started with small things. A coffee on Saturday. A phone call after work. A story about my mother that I had never heard. He told me she hated black coffee but drank it anyway because she thought sugar made her look soft around the other officers. I laughed. It was the first time someone had given me a memory of her instead of a photograph. Before we left the station that day, he showed me the compass tattoo again. I finally understood what it meant. It wasn't pointing toward a place. It was pointing toward someone. My mother had spent her life trying to keep me safe. And somehow, after all those years, the truth still found its way home.